Today, we're going to be talking about virtual reality and user research, so welcome. I lead user research in the industry group here at Salesforce, and this is Andrew Conn. He is Director of Product Design, also in the industry group here with me. One thing you will note is that there's some cameras around. We're actually recording this session in 360-degree VR, so we're going to post these videos after this session is over. We also have a normal recording as well. We'll post that on the chatter feed. We'll share this on social media, so if you want to see what it's like for someone to give a presentation in 360 degrees VR, you will be able to in a couple of days. So I'm going to get started since we have a very short presentation today. If you've been in any one of our sessions, you'll be familiar with this. We're going to be talking about some very futuristic stuff today. So please don't make any buying decisions based on what we're discussing. It's very, very innovative, but as a result, you probably shouldn't be making buying decisions based on what we're talking about. So I'm going to be talking about three things, and in particular, we're going to talk about why you should use virtual reality in user research. Then Andrew is actually going to talk about some of the nitty-gritty of how you actually record VR, hardware, software, things like that, lessons we learned. It's actually not quite as simple as it would seem. And then we're going to move on to some big takeaways so that you might be able to go and use this in one of your own organizations. So, given that you're here, you probably at least are curious about VR and the hype, and you might even have bought into the idea that it's not actually just for games, entertainment, things like that. In particular, we agree with that. Gartner actually agrees with that as well. If you look at the graph here that on display, it's moved over to a more mature technology on their emerging technology graph. And you might have seen videos like people going scuba diving or going over waterfalls, exploring the Amazon. These are incredible 360-degree VR videos, and they're fantastic for really experiencing the world that in a way that you wouldn't be able to before. But imagine transferring that to something a little more practical. Maybe you can record people using software, using their mobile phones, doing their jobs. Problems like our customers have here at Salesforce. And in particular, in user experience and research, we care about understanding our customers and using that knowledge to build better products. So VR in particular is really interesting for this because it allows people to view customers and how they're going about their jobs using our software, maybe having some pain, in a very immersive, empathetic way. You can see what it's like for them to live their lives. So you can connect with them, potentially in a new way that flat video pictures wouldn't be able to. Additionally, since we're recording something, you don't have to just share it with one person, two people. You can actually share it with your entire organization, or even upload it to the internet and share it with millions of people. And these experiences are incredibly accessible in a way that they didn't used to be. You can be on the entire other side of the planet and see how your team is doing research or even coding on another continent, which is fantastic if you're trying to scale a company up and save money. And you really want to experience deep empathy for your customers and really understand what they're going through so you can make better decisions and build better products. So what are we doing here at Salesforce? So you're our customers. You understand that you have pretty deep, complex problems. We do a lot of research in healthcare and financial services. People are trying to cure cancer. They're trying to revolutionize the banking industry. These are not insignificant things. For example, the picture here is a session I did with a nurse who was talking to a homeless man. He was having serious mental health problems, and she was trying to counsel him while being on the phone and using our software. I wanted to communicate her story back to my team in the best way I could because it was so important. I wanted to tell people that she was doing very important work and we could enable her to connect with her patient in a very significant way. So by using VR to do this, you can actually experience what it's like to be her potentially. So as I discussed on the previous page, VR has all these advantages for scale, for cost, But additionally, you can imagine you can't fit like 20, 30 people in a room with a participant, with a research participant. So it's much better because it allows you to also have research available to an entire team, everyone from engineers, developers, marketers, doc writers, all the way up to your executives. And you want to enable them to make better decisions, build better products, and move forward. So what exactly are we doing? So in particular, we're actually recording sessions in VR, live streaming them back to our team at Salesforce, and sharing them. And here's an example of an interview we did at UCSF in their breast cancer center with a very experienced nurse. And you can see us doing the interview, and Andrew's sort of controlling this. You could actually view this with the Google Cardboard headset, so you guys can play with them after the talk. But if you view this, you can feel her emotion, how much she cares about what she's doing. One interesting thing to note here is as we move the camera, you can see how important camera angles are for recording VR. You aren't just recording something flat, so you have to think about where you're positioning the camera. It affects the immersiveness of what you're doing. So that's something Andrew is actually going to talk about. But we found it to be really effective for bringing people closer to our field research experiments in interviews. We are in an exam room in a hospital. You couldn't bring a whole team there, but now you sort of can with virtual reality. Now I'm going to pass it over to Andrew, who's going to talk to you about some of the nitty-gritty of actually getting this set up.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to talk a little bit about the hardware and the software, right? So I think the first important thing to really note here is that it's still really early. This whole ecosystem is still very rough around the edges, and you're going to bump into that a lot. But it's fixing itself at a very extremely, I think, rapid pace. And so, we're looking at a couple of things here. The image on the left in the back is a picture of some kind of open source streaming software that we've used internally to kind of live stream back to our teams. We're going to get into some of the physical hardware, the camera stuff, and then YouTube. It's actually kind of tricky to figure out to get the settings exactly right for some reason. But it's just like Megan was outlining. It's such a cool technology, but it's going to be rough around the edges, and you have to be prepared for that, and it's totally fine. So we did a bunch of research on cameras when we first started all of this, and here are recommendations, just from price point perspective. There's some new cameras coming out on the market that are probably better. But for right now on the price point, these are our recommendations. So we have the Ricoh Theta S. That's the black camera on the left. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we have the Insta360 Nano. That's the white one that you see upside down on the iPhone. So, just interesting, right? $400, $200. It's fairly affordable for an organization potentially like yours to be able to go out and do this. The Ricoh Theta S, the black one, interestingly, if you're going to be doing live streaming, one of the things that this requires is a dedicated laptop. So what are you going to do? You're going to have it in a backpack, or it's kind of awkward, right? The reason we got the Insta360 Nano as well is because it actually can just stream Wi-Fi LTE. It just plugs into the top of your phone. So potentially much more portable, walk around. It's less intrusive for the person that you're actually talking to as well. So brass tacks, how much is this actually going to cost as an organization? So startup cost for kind of one camera kit is about $600 to $800, depending on the camera that you're looking for. So there's some other things in here that you probably want to purchase as well that's included in this cost, this bottom line cost here. But tripod camera stabilizer. We're going to talk a little bit about why that might be important, some of these other things. But I think also just something really to note is this backup plan. Make sure you have a backup plan when you're going to do these things. If you're going on site and something is extremely important to record, just make sure you have a backup plan, because more often than not, we've had to use a backup plan just to make sure that we are able to capture that, because you don't want to lose that experience, right? So as Megan alluded to earlier, there's just some recording fundamentals that you're probably going to want to think about when you're doing this, because this isn't just a traditional camera where it's a window into the world. You're actually positioning this camera and you're creating the world around it. So there's other just kind of principles that you probably want to think about as you're going through and creating these experiences. So really quickly, position, movement, time, resolution, spatial sound. Position, you saw we were moving the camera around, and it actually affected the experience a lot, right? So really think about if you're going to go in and do some research, and try to understand what's happening with somebody, how they're using a piece of software. It could be anything. Just really kind of plan for that. And you might want to experiment beforehand just to make sure that you don't lose that knowledge that's being transferred out. Movement. You saw the movement in the example video, but be really careful with this one, right? You can imagine somebody is going to be in this immersive environment, holding this device potentially to their head, using one of these cardboards, or maybe it's strapped to their head. If it's moving around, you're going to make people sick. It's going to happen, right? And they're not going to want to watch it. So you got to be really careful, and that's why we indicated a camera stabilizer. Time. Now, there's a bunch of studies out there kind of indicating the amount of time that somebody is willing to watch something in VR or participate in these experiences. And it's roughly 20 minutes. Like, that's probably what you need to shoot for. So I would suggest don't really go beyond that. You can record much more than that, but just think about delivering those experiences to stakeholders, engineers, product people, whoever it may be, in probably 20-minute chunks. Resolution, the cameras that we showed, pretty good balance of resolution, sound, all these other things, but there's cameras coming out on the market now that are streaming live in 4K. It's something that you are probably going to want to think about because, the closer you can get to like a real world resolution, the better this kind of immersive experience is going to be. And lastly, spatial sound. This is something just to think about. It's not really there yet. These cameras don't record with spatial sound. It's stereoscopic sound. But if you think about the world and how you experience the world, there's a noise behind you. You're hearing things behind you. You probably want to turn and look at that thing. And if you're not recording with that kind of directional audio, then you're missing half of the experience, right? And so that's still being investigated by us, but I think the market is still actually maturing in that space as well. Live streaming, just be prepared. We're half kidding here. It's still really, really janky, to be honest. What you'll find is you're going to feel out these rough edges in the ecosystem with how your hardware and your software works together, and then you're adding this additional piece. And this is really, I think, much more towards the bleeding edge when you're streaming live VR back to somebody. There's many more things to think about, and so there'll be a follow-up article about how we're actually doing this here internally. So if you're following us or you want to email us, we'll be happy to send it out. But again, just something to think about because you're going to need a backup plan, especially in this scenario. So with that, I'll pass it back off to Megan, and she's going to do some key takeaways.
Thanks. So as a researcher, ethics are kind of always on the top of my mind. I feel like it's something that if I'm not thinking about, I'm not doing my job, especially customers, users. You're signing up to participate with me, and if I'm not treating you well, I'm really sort of breaking a sacred bond. And one of the things that we discovered is that in VR, ethics are even more complicated than they normally are, which we do a lot of work in like healthcare, and it's pretty complicated in healthcare as it is. As it turns out, as you can see in the example of the photo on the right, on the side of the slide, we set up in the Ferry building, public space, but Andrew started recording, and he couldn't see that he was recording someone behind him. Because as it turns out, we don't see in 360 degrees, which means you aren't going to always be aware of everything that you're recording, which means if you're in a sensitive setting where there's data that's, say, on a wall or things that people want to keep private, you can't mark them out or just face one way with a camera like you normally can, which is something to really consider. And also in terms of consent, people are going to be walking in and out of your space, and you might not even be aware of it because you're facing the wrong way. So consent, privacy, things that are ethical considerations when you're doing research are really a little more complex here, and I don't think we're going to have a full understanding of how to tackle them for a little while. So it's an ongoing conversation. And the second point I think is really interesting, namely that VR is very immersive. That's why it's cool. That's why we can share experiences and feel what it's like to be another person. But because it's so immersive, people might not want to be recorded in VR. And we might not understand that yet. The example is, you might be okay with someone taking a static picture of your bedroom, but having someone record everything in VR and be able to explore it and essentially sort of navigate through it, that feels a little more uncomfortable. You might not be okay with that. So you might not be able to get informed consent from participants for being recorded in VR because they don't understand it yet. It's a new technology, it's a new field, so it's something we're going to have to feel out and sort of be thoughtful about. So I hope we've probably convinced you that VR is actually a new way of capturing experiences, of sharing experiences, of really understanding people and how they experience the world. It's not just another way of recording video. And I think this is fantastic because it's a way of sharing stories. And as it turns out, one of the best ways of influencing decision makers is actually to tell stories. If you can just tell an executive, tell someone important about the pain, it's not going to be as compelling as actually showing them in a 360-degree VR experience on a headset. So I really think this is a good direction to go and something we're really excited about. So I think the technology, even though it's a little on edge in terms of development, I think it's worth it. And it's accelerating so quickly that even 6 months from now, I think we're going to be in a different place. And one thing that we really wanted to mention is that even though the live streaming is one of the biggest challenges we ran into, we think it's worth it because it creates a shared experience in a way that recording does not. The example I like to give is that imagine you're in a doctor's appointment and it's really important, it's emotionally compelling to you, and you have a relative on another continent that you can't have there with you. Imagine having them there live streaming, essentially being able to empathize with you. So you can do that real time and even communicate potentially. The technology is not quite there yet, but we're almost there, and we think it'll really change how we do things. So this quote really encapsulates why we're using VR at Salesforce. Because as it turns out, we care about our customers and we want to build better products for you. And we want to understand you, and we think virtual reality is one of the ways to do it. We're really excited about the future of this technology. We're really encouraging other people to play around with it. There are no right answers here. I think one of the exciting things is that we all can shape it by being involved in it now and being on the cutting edge. So if you want to talk to us afterwards, we'll be available. We're really excited about working with other people who might be interested in this. So thank you very much.